Hello, in this presentation I want to talk about the Moodlerooms Shell design, with the only goal being to make the Moodlerooms as user-friendly as possible. I want to start off by comparing it to the iPhone here, and as we can see on the iPhone, one of the lessons of the iPhone is that the thousands of things that the iPhone can do can be accessed through something that's basically the size of the palm of our hand, and all of these items on the iPhone are interactable, meaning we can click on them and go somewhere else and all have this user-friendly interface on it. If we compare that to what we have, our interface being, of course, the Moodlerooms Shell, the question is there a way that we can make this as user-friendly and do some of those same type of principles that have that information in as little an area as possible and have it as accessible as possible? Currently, this is 1 week of one of the classes in AC 1110. Many of the classes are formatted very similarly. Some are longer or some are smaller, but if we were just to scroll through 1 week on the scale that it is in, it would take 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of scrolling basically to get through that. Now some classes are longer, some are smaller, but the format is much the same. And if we were to put that on just one screen, this is basically how much information that we're taking a look at on one screen. That's just 1 week of 5. Not including the overview before we get into the week that we have to scroll through each time. And it just seems like that's a lot of information or a lot of text on one page that we may be able to make a little bit more user-friendly. And we could move it from something that looks basically like this to something that maybe looks more like this for each week, where basically it's on one page. And if they want to, instead of having just text, they can click onto something and then get to the text, rather than just having hard-coded text that they might not be using as they go through everything. So how is it possible that we can go from this maybe to something that looks more like this and fits on one page per week? And one idea is if we had this whole thing, this is 1 week worth of information, we can see that all this information on top, most of it is text, most of it is directions. And that would be similar, I would compare this to be similar as if we opened our iPhone and they had to scroll through the directions, and we had to scroll through those before we can call someone or do anything else we wanted to do on the iPhone. The reason it's up there, I believe, is to try to force the user to basically read this before they go on and do what they want to do, which is only really in this one-fourth portion on the very bottom. This is where the user has to actually interface and do work. All this stuff up here is stuff that the user doesn't do any work with. They're not actually turning anything in, and most of it is not interactive at all. And what we're trying to do is force the reader to basically read through that. Now, I would argue that just like if we had the directions on an iPhone pop up that we have to scroll through before we can call someone, we probably wouldn't read that any more often than if we had to click on something and read the directions as we needed it. And it would also probably increase just kind of like the irritation factor. We would probably be thinking, I need to get a different phone. In this case, it doesn't make me do that every time we want to call someone. Similar to here, we would be thinking, I don't see why I have to scroll through this whole thing every time I want to do an assignment, which is way down here in the bottom of the screen. So how is it possible maybe for us to condense some of this and make it more user-friendly? Of course, the idea would be that we can take a lot of this down if we have just straight text like this in terms of the objectives and the topics, which are included in every week. Then we could just put that into one line item and say, hey, here's the objectives and the topics. If you've read through it one time, no, you don't need to scroll through it every single time you go into it. But if you want to reference it, we have to click here. You can then reference it in a different page, and this is going to be a lot more useful in a lot of ways, because if they then did that, it would open in a PDF file or in a website type document. Here's a PDF file format, and that means it's on a different tab. So a couple benefits to that is that they can toggle back and forth from here back to Moodlerooms. They can open up different things in Moodlerooms. They can then toggle back over here and look at their objectives in comparison to the work they're doing. They can also save this and save it as a PDF. They can print it. These are things that they can't do as easily over here if it's up in the top of the Moodlerooms shell. And the same thing can be done for all this. So lessons. Now, these are all areas where we have instructional videos that they can click on, and it is interfaceable, meaning they click on this, they go to somewhere else, and they can see the instructional videos. However, it's still something that's very long. If they want to go to something else in the page and they have to scroll through this every time, that could be very frustrating or not very user-friendly. And again, we could just put this on one link. Here's all your lessons, material, and lectures that you would go in here, just click on that, and you'll get that information. Now, you might be asking at this point, is there an ACICS requirement or regulatory requirement that requires us to have, for example, these objectives and topics? Yes, there is, but that's not a requirement for us to have them hard-coded into the shell. We could have them in there as a link, and again, I think that would be a lot more user-friendly to have that. So if we did that here, again, we can break all this down just to one thing here, and then again, it would be opened up in a separate PDF document. They can go back and forth. They can go back to Moodlerooms while this window's still open. They can start working on assignments and then click back over here and use these hyperlinks and actually be able to look up what they want to look at the same time as going back to the Moodlerooms here. Again, they can print it, they can download it, they can save it and access it offline. All things they can't do as well when it's hard-coded into the Moodlerooms. Then we have this big blue box, the big blue box of the discussion forums. And I totally understand the reasoning here. We want to make sure that students are reading through the discussion forum formats, and we're making them scroll through this even when they're trying to go in and not do the discussions, but maybe be working on something else. We're making them scroll through the directions just for the discussion forum, even if that's not what they're intending to do that time they logged into that. And again, I think this is the same effect is happening as if we had the directions on the iPhone every time we opened it. I don't think it's increasing the amount of times it's read. I think it's probably increasing on the amount of time of frustration to scroll through it, at least on a subconscious level. I mean, if you're a bachelor student in this program and you've been going to school here for like 3 years, how many times have you seen this big blue box? You see it every mod, you see it every class, you see it every week, you see it every time that you open through this. You got to scroll through it 5 times, 5 times a week. It's in there every week on there. It's a lot of repetitions to be there, and obviously I think that it would be better off if we just had discussion questions. That's the discussion questions. Once they open that assignment, then that's where that big blue box could be. We could put the big blue box in there just like we do with everything else when they go into the assignment. And I think it would even be nicer not to have the big blue box here and just have a link. Just have a link and saying, hey, here's the instructions. If you've read the instructions 100 times, if this is the 100th time that you've been into a discussion forum, no, you probably don't need to look at it again. But if you want to look at it, it's there. If they have not read it, I think they're more likely to click on this and read it in a new window because we're giving them the option to look at it rather than just kind of throwing it and shoving it down their throat. So, and the same thing, we can also give them an instructional video on how to do that. We could standardize that fairly easily, go over the instructions for discussion forums and put that into every Moodlerooms shell. The assignments. So we have the assignments here. Note on the assignments that we currently have, we have a subcategory saying assignments and projects. And then we know it's already in week 1. We're in the week 1 portion of the shell. And then we name the assignment week 1 assignment 1. Well, that's redundant. We don't really need to call it week 1 assignment 1. Now, I know that could help on the gradebook to do that, but in here it doesn't add any information for us to say week 1 assignment 1 under the heading of assignment that's under week 1. Now, what we could do, I think would be better if we just named it, hey, these are under assignments, and call it just W1A1. Now, I know that sounds abstract, but it saves a lot more room, and the only reason we need it is to reference to the gradebook. The W1 could help us to list it out in the gradebook, and the A1 the students don't even need because, again, it'll be categorized, but for us it might help us to categorize. And that'll leave us some information that we can actually put some useful stuff here. Useful stuff being like, hey, this assignment is going to be done in McGraw-Hill's, which is a third-party software. We can tell them what chapter it's covering. This is information that's new, information that's useful. And then by doing that, we can eliminate some of these extra notes. We can eliminate this note. We don't have to say that this is in Connect and say that this is in Connect. We can list that right on the side here and have it be a little bit lighter. I also note that the headings are in blue, and maybe I'm just picky on this, but it seems to me if something's in blue, that usually means that it's going to be a hyperlink. So I would think that if it's not a hyperlink, that we would avoid using blue. Maybe, I mean, again, that might be just my thinking of it, but when I see something that's blue on a website, it usually indicates a hyperlink to me. And then homework, obviously, you can do the same thing. We can just cut out a lot of this stuff and just call it W1H1, and then cut out a lot of the added information. So that's how I think we can go from something that like this, where students have to scroll through 4 pages of information, and we have a lot of the stuff that we do not need to use on top in hard-coded text before they get to the 1/4 of the page where they actually need to interact with the stuff, and that's the important thing down here, to something like this, which basically is fitting on one page. They can click on the information that they need and get into it, and be less intimidated, hopefully, by going through week by week. And that's how we can apply some of the principles of the iPhone to the Moodlerooms classroom, and of course make Steve Jobs proud in the process.